Okay, so this is another lecture on with regard to logic, and this is for the on. This is regarding uh, testing logical arguments for their validity. So I want to pull up a sheet that goes over how to test an argument for its validity. So focus on this sheet of paper, and I'm going to add some material to this sheet of paper. In the first lecture, we talked about an overview of the course. In the second lecture, we began just talking about what is formal logic. We will not spend much more time on this. You'll have a couple of more lectures, and then we'll have an exam over logic, and then we will move on to the actual substance of this particular course. But this is important for the purposes of argumentation, so we're required to address some degree of logic in this class. So I'm going to pull up my screens now and share those with you. You should be able to see that screen, and I want you to pay attention to and make notes based upon what I say here, based upon this form. Look under definitions at the top of the page. I want to point out to you three things. First of all, under definitions, there are three things that you need to understand what they are. And that is, first of all, whether an argument is factually correct. And I have put in bold the words factually correct. Whether the argument is valid, and I've put in bold the word valid. And then whether the argument is sound, and I've put in bold the word sound. So those are the three things that you'll need to know. And it sounds a little more complicated than it actually is. Don't make it more complicated in your mind than it is. So first of all, when is an argument factually correct? Well, notice the sentence. An argument is factually correct if and only if all of its premises are true. All right, so that just deals with actual truth of the premises. So let me drop down here and give you another example on this. Let's say we have premise one that says all humans are mortal. And then premise two says Socrates is a human. All right. And the conclusion, therefore, Socrates is mortal. All right, so let's just look at that one argument for a brief moment. That argument, the first thing I would ask you is, let me see, I'm going to put sample argument here. Do this right here. All right, so the first thing I would ask you about this argument is this argument factually correct? All right, I'm going to put questions. Is this argument factually correct? That just simply means, is this argument actually true in reality? All right. Is it actually true that all humans are mortal? Yes. Is it actually true that Socrates is a human? Yes. So you're only concerned about the premises. So is this argument factually correct? Yes, it's factually correct. All right. All right. So that's factual correctness. Factual correctness has to do with whether the actual premises are actually or factually correct in real life, as you and I know them. The second issue is whether the argument is valid. Now, notice under definition, it says an argument is valid if and only if its conclusion follows from the premises. So if the conclusion of the argument is required by the premises, then therefore the argument may be said to be valid. So let me at this point give you an example of that. I'm going to ask you, is this argument valid? All right, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Is that a valid argument? that is a valid argument because the conclusion must be is required by the premises. I tell students to read it like this: if all humans are mortal, and if Socrates is a human, therefore must I conclude that Socrates is mortal? Yes. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, I must conclude that Socrates is mortal. I can't conclude that Socrates might be mortal, that he may be mortal, that perhaps he is mortal. Those premises require that I absolutely conclude 100% that Socrates must be mortal. All humans are mortal. If all humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, is it required that Socrates also be mortal? Yes. So is the argument valid? Yes, it's valid. It's valid. All right. So that's testing whether or not the argument is factually correct. Yes, it is. Is the argument is the argument valid? Yes. The conclusion rationally, logically derives from the premises. Then the last question is the argument sound? All right, sound. Notice the definition for sound. An argument is sound if and only if it is both factually correct and valid. So is this argument factually correct? Yes, it's factually correct. So we check that one off. Is this argument valid? Yes, it's valid. So it's both factually correct, it's and also valid. So therefore it is sound. Yes, it is sound. So all three of those are answered. And that's kind of the way that it works. All right. So now then, let's look at another sample. This one's a little more in depth, but it's a good one to look at. I think we looked at it last class. Let me see. All things that can let me say that like this: all things that fly have been to the moon. All right. Premise 2: hippos can fly. Conclusion: therefore, hippos have been to the moon. All right, so let's go through the steps and the questions regarding this argument. All right, is this argument factually correct? Well, you know it's not factually correct because it is not true that all things that can fly that have been to the moon. That's not true in real life. So there are airplanes that fly that have not been to the moon. There are frisbees that fly that have not been to the moon. There are birds that fly that have not been to the moon. So it is not factually correct. So no, it's not factually correct. All right, is it valid? And I'm going to give you a more simple way in one moment to determine the validity of the argument. But let's just say for right now, yes, this is a valid argument. It is a valid argument. Yes, it's valid. You say, well, how can it be valid if it's not true? Well, validity doesn't have to do with truth. It has to do with validity. If I accept the premises, even though they are not true, if I accept those premises, then therefore, if I accept them as they are, can I conclude that the argument is valid? Yes, I can. So don't look at the exam and say, well, that's absurd. Those things are not true, so therefore it's not valid. The premises may not be true and the argument's still valid. All right. And I'll give you a way to test validity momentarily. That's a little more that will simplify that for you, because otherwise you'll sit here and you'll look at that forever trying to decide if it's valid or not. I'll give you a more reliable method by which you can test validity. So the last question is the argument sound? Does it have soundness? Well, in order for it to be sound, it has to be both factually correct and it has to be valid. This argument regarding things that fly and hippos is not factually correct, although it is valid. So therefore, it is not sound. It's not sound because it has to be both factually correct and also valid. But this one is not factually correct, so therefore it's not sound. So that's really the three tests for an argument. On the exam, I'm going to ask you Is this argument factually correct? Is this argument valid? Is this argument sound? All right. So that's kind of the way that it will work. Now, let me give you a test for validity that will a simple way to determine validity. All right. So let's just take the argument up there regarding Socrates. P1, all humans are mortal. P2, Socrates is a human. Conclusion. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. All right, so that's the argument. So on validity, here's the way you can test an argument and its validity that will simplify things, and you won't have to guess. And this is a bit more complicated with other arguments, but I'm going to give you basic arguments. I'm not going to give you on the exam advanced arguments that test over more complex concepts in logic. I'm just giving you these basic arguments. And as for the arguments that are going to be on the exam, and the basic arguments that I want you to be familiar with, if you apply this test, you will more easily and you will more quickly be able to determine the validity of the argument, as opposed to just sitting there and looking at it and trying to guess if it's valid or not. So here's what you do. Now, notice this closely. Let's go by humans, and let's just put the word A. We're symbolizing humans. A. A stands for humans. So all humans, A, are mortal. That's another category. We're going to put B. No reason. We're just selecting A and B and C and D because those things are simple. A, B, C, D. All right. So all humans, A, are mortal. B. All right. Then we come to the premise 2. Socrates. Well, we haven't labeled Socrates, so that's a new category. So we're going to put C. All right. Socrates is a human. Well, we've labeled human already, and that's A. All right. You see, we've already labeled human up here. That's A. So all humans, A, are mortal. B. Socrates, a new category, which is C, is human, which is already labeled A. All right. So then we come down here and we say, therefore, Socrates, who has already been labeled C, is, wait a second. Socrates is mortal, which is B. So we have symbolically represented that argument. All right. So humans, we've given that the letter A. Mortal, we've given that the letter B. Socrates, we've given that the letter C. The A, human has already been labeled A. Then in the conclusion, Socrates has already been labeled C, and mortal has already been labeled B. So the symbolism is going to look like this. A's are B, C is A, therefore C is B. That's the way it's going to look. All right. That is the form for a valid argument. If it has that form, it is a valid argument as far as the arguments I'm going to give you on the exam. If it has that form, that is a valid argument. All right. So if you symbolize the premises and then you symbolize the conclusion, and the symbols come out in that order exactly, all right, A's are B, C is A, therefore C is B, then that tells you that's a valid argument. If it says A's are B's, C is B, therefore C is A, that's not a valid argument. It has to precisely follow that argument, as far as the arguments that I'm going to give you on the exam. All right. There are some exceptions in the more advanced consideration of this topic, but we're not going to be tested on those. We're staying with this form. All right. So Don't spend an exorbitant amount of time trying to figure out in your head if the argument is valid, because there's a couple on there that will take you forever, and then you'll end up still having to guess. Symbolize the arguments just like I did. All right, now let's look at something else here. Let me see. We're going to go back up to the all hippos, all right? P1, another simple way. Same thing, all right? P1, all things that can fly have been to the moon. P2, hippos can fly. Conclusion, hippos have been to the moon. So how are we going to test the validity of that argument? We can sit here and look at that and try to figure that out, but you're going to waste time, and then you're going to have to guess in the final analysis. If you will just symbolize it, all right? Things that can fly, that's A. Have been to the moon, that's B. Hippos can fly, that's C. Because we haven't previously labeled hippos, so that's a third category. Hippos can fly. Hippos are C. Fly has already been labeled, that's A, right? And then on the conclusion, hippos, C, have been to the moon, which is B. All right? I'll get it right in one moment. B, all right? So you've given it a symbolic representation. So here's the symbolism. A's are B. We're good so far. C's are A. We're good so far. C is B. We're good. That's a valid argument. See, that's much more easy than sitting here and trying to say, well, what about this? What about that? Just symbolize it in that fashion. All right. All right. So let's look at the next argument on this page. All dogs are reptiles. All dogs are Martians. Therefore, all dogs are Martians. You can look at that one pretty easily and tell that's not valid, but let's look at it. A, all dogs, A, are reptiles, B. All right, and then all dogs, A, well, it's already wrong. It's supposed to be a C there. And then Martians, we haven't labeled Martians, so that's a C, I believe, right? Therefore, all dogs, A, this one is just not valid at all. That's the way you test the validity of the argument. All right, so that tells you that argument is not valid. Okay, so is that particular argument factually correct? No, it's not, because dogs are not reptiles, dogs are not Martians. So it's not factually correct, it's not valid, and it's not sound, because it's neither factually correct nor valid. So that's the way that's going to work. So that's a more simple fashion by which you can assess the validity of the argument. So let me review with you. On the exam, I'm going to give you some questions, and I will give you a syllogism, just like we've gone over. And I will ask you maybe in one question whether the argument is factually correct. I will ask you in another question whether the argument is valid. I will ask you in another question whether the argument is sound. Or I might say something to the effect of, this argument is factually correct and valid, but this argument is not sound. Or I might give you the option of, this argument B is sound and valid, but not factually correct. Or C, this argument is neither factually correct, nor valid, nor sound. So I might mix it up. So, but if you have this sheet in front of you, and I'm going to post this on the course site, if you have this sheet in front of you, that will help you significantly. So that's the conclusion of this lecture with regard to the questions of factual correctness of a syllogism, the validity of a syllogism, and the soundness of a syllogism. All right. Have a great day.